Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for number 3 in our Poetry Toolkits live broadcasts. I'm joining you from the Wheeler Centre based in Naarm. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional custodians of this land that was stolen and land that has been cared for by First Nations people since time immemorial. It is important that we move across this place with great care and respect, that we recognise the knowledge of this land's First peoples, and that we acknowledge that the violence of colonialism is ongoing. I ask that you also acknowledge the land from which you are tuning in from today. My name is Melody Paloma, and I'm the facilitator of Toolkits Poetry, a program which is run by Express Media and Australian Poetry. For those of you who aren't familiar, Toolkits is an online intensive 12-week program run for writers under 30. It provides one-on-one mentorship to guide young writers through the development of new work, alongside a series of workshops and presentations, some of which are broadcast live with guest artists. Express Media are an organisation focused on the development of young writers. They produce brilliant programs like Facts and the masterminds behind VoiceWorks, the quarterly literary journal for writers under 25. And Australian Poetry is the peak body for poetry in Australia. They produce a national festival program as well as a suite of publications. So I'd encourage you all to go out and subscribe to VoiceWorks and Australian Poetry Journal if you can, or check both Express Media and Australian Poetry out via their websites. Toolkits is made possible by our generous funders, the Copyright Agency Cultural Fund, and Toolkits Live is presented by Express Media in partnership with Regional Arts Victoria as part of the Arts Connect series funded by the federal government's Regional Arts Fund. Tonight, we're very lucky. We'll be hearing from Norman Erickson Pasarabu. Norman is broadcasting from Indonesia, and he'll be speaking on the subject of reclaiming joy. Norman is an Indonesian poet, an Indonesian author of poetry, fiction and non-fiction. His work in Indonesian has been translated into Vietnamese, Bengali, English, French and Dutch. He also writes in English when he feels like it, and his work in English has appeared or is forthcoming in Pen Transmissions, Cordite Poetry Review and Overland Literary Journal. His first book of poems, Sergius Seeks Bacchus, which I have here, full of post-it notes. It's translated by Tiffany Sau and was one of the winning entries of Pen Presents East and Southeast Asia and received Pen Translates awards from the English Pen. So I'm going to pass over to Norman now, who will speak for around 45 minutes, and then I'll come back on and ask some questions. Please tweet us your questions as well using the hashtag EMToolkits. Thanks, Norman. I'll pass over to you.
Hello. Good evening to everyone who watch from your house. Today I will share a bit about humor and how we can reclaim joy by using poetry. Maybe let's start with a question. What is humor? Well, the very easy answer is it's something that make us laugh. It's something that gives you haha and make us like it's like tickle. And there are so many. Let's start with let's open with a, a theory regarding humor because I think it's important place to start. I think we have heard about the benign violation theory. Um, it's like what if something is unexpected happen, and then if it's like not dangerous and people laugh over it. Like for example, if you sleep on the floor and you are okay, and then your family will laugh at you. It's um actually can be used as a way to interrogate the landscape of humor. I think because like what is benign for you? Is it the same with the other person? What is what kind of violation that is benign? What is dangerous? And then I feel like to use humor is to navigate between those sensibilities. I'm gonna open this first presentation by reading a poem by my friend Harry Josephine Giles. I met Harry in the London this year. Harry is a poet based in Edinburgh, and they are a trans poet, and I really love this poem that Harry. You can find it in Tongwitz, their collection of poetry. I think it's really wonderful book. The poem is titled "Last Poem in which Harry Giles meets Harry Styles." This is Harry Styles from New Direction. Harry, are you going to play hard to get? Harry, what kind of boys do you like? This stupid dance isn't cool. Harry, please keep your kisses to yourself. Do you want a drink before we start? Harry, are you okay? Harry, get your hands off me. Harry, make me. I want you to come with me, Harry. I want you to stretch your legs, Harry. I want to get on the floor. I want to use teeth and tongue. You're a blessing, Harry. I don't think your jokes are funny. Harry, tell me what happened. Why is it always me? What was that, babe? Harry, would you cry if I step on your foot? Harry, don't pretend you're not mine. Harry, don't spoil this ride. So I feel like this poem is funny in so many different ways and so many different reasons. The first of all is there is a the the one who takes these lines is not clear. So the idea of like who says these words between Harry Giles and Harry Styles is one of the initial thing that make this poem funny. But then if you see the difference between Harry Giles and Harry Styles and the amount of privileges between them in the like social landscape, the poem actually asks a deeper and more important, more radical question, like like the lines, "Harry, would you cry if I step on your foot?" So I feel like this particular line speaks about how uh, heterosexuality or like heterosexual men in general um, dominate a space where in a space that women queer also lives. So I think uh, we can see how in this poem a kind of like dating language is used to to show the difference between Harry Giles and Harry Styles. Um, well, the language in humorous poetry actually relies on uh, how to say like the familiarization, like it's want to make things strange, sound strange, um, and sometimes I feel like humor also like the strangeness of like in a poetry come from um, like juxtaposition of images, like you put two images that are so different together. Like if you notice, there are so many like there are so many poetry that, for example, I recently met Selina Tusitala, and she used she recreate Captain Cook as a bad boyfriend in one of her poems. So this kind of like juxtaposition, like Captain Cook turn into a kind of like that boyfriend is makes it funny, and then because like uh, a kind how to say a colonial figure who is kind of like venerated in Australian space is now uh, just a bad boyfriend. That's so. it's easier to send your criticism because it's no longer something that is generated, and I think that's this one of the power of humor. And I feel like the framework of the framework of humor also allows that images that are initially not often to be juxtaposed to become juxtaposable. For example, in my poem, I use because in Indonesian, when I was in high school and I joined a Christian student association, sometimes we use like Celine Dion songs, like for example, "Because You Love Me" as a songs to like songs for the for praising the God. But then, so I in one of my poems, I use that I juxtapose the idea of Mariah Carey songs as Christian songs, and many of my friends think it's funny, even though like in my in my life it's actually pretty common, and it's like not taken as a joke. I mean, like it's not funny. It's just like as it is in real life. So I think the difference of context also makes things funny, and sometimes because in poetry we tend to like compress context, so so the poem kind of like become more like have can have many interpretations. So that's how some poem can be humorous. And um, I also think how in thinking about poetry, humor in poetry, initially we naturally think about the language. The language sometimes we feel like humorous poetry use strange language, and it's like its intention is to familiarize the space that the poetry fills. But I also want to note that um, like I think humor in my poetry that I write in English is very different from the humor in poetry that I write in Indonesian. Humor I write in Indonesian relies a lot on how I experience life, and humor I write in English relies more on how I experience English. So when I start writing poetry in English after a after a residency I made a few years ago, and that's how English is imposed on me because it's the only way to connect with people. But then, for example, when I use the phrase "adult nanny" in one of my poems, many people like it's so funny, even though like initially, what I want to say is adult nanny. It's like nanny for adult, but then for people, it's seen as something unfamiliar for them. So I think um, many times humor comes simply from different lenses that is used by the writer and the reader. In my first book of poems, for example, I use a lot of accounting language because I was trained as an accountant, and many people saw the poems as funny because they don't see the world as an accountant does. So I feel like many humor in our lives can come from our daily lives because everyone leads a different life, and that kind of otherness give funny moments, but also it's interesting. Again, like when we talk about benign violation, what's what's violation is benign, and I feel like when we talk about racist jokes or like insensitive jokes, it's coming from the inability of the writer or like the comedian to see what's benign for other people. So I feel like um, humor coming a lot from listening to others in terms of like you need to like be more sensible in seeing how people see their lives. Um, I also like to see poetry as fiction. We've seen in fiction, like real fiction, when they let us see how a person becomes that person, how they react with the social structure they are in, how they struggle, how they win, how they lose, how they bloom, how they diminish. And I feel like humor in poetry can be very exciting if we use humor as a way to track deeper into reality, to see the inside of the I, the he, the she, the they in the poem, how things might be spiraling for them inside. Um, I want to read another, like, uh, you can read this poem from Ellen Van Irvin in Mascara. I will only read some parts. We are cousins, so we grew up on different sides of the axis, different sides of the moon. Got to remember, same grandmother, same grandmother. We don't share memories. You recall a football game against boys. You fell down, and I turned on the fella who did it. This violence sounds entirely not like me at all. I remember you come to live with us when your house burned down. You were amazed at how many socks I had, and you asked if you went to my school, would you be the only dark girl in your class? This was the first time I realized that others could see us differently. When I read this poem, the first time I read it, I laughed a lot. I laughed out loud when I read you were amazed at how many socks I had. I feel like this line is very simple, but there are so many things that is like how to say, like there are so many things that the line hides. I like to see amazed at how many socks I had at sometimes like something like there is a class difference between the I in the poem and the cousin. So and I feel like the images of how to see this eye showing the cousins have her room, and then oh this is like my wardrobe, and then so many socks, and that's the first thing the cousin said. It makes the line humorous for me. So, but it also I think it's also made me think more because like it shows um, there is a difference in terms of financial power between the I and the cousin. So um, yeah, so first of all, we talk about language, and I feel like in poetry, in writing humorous poetry, we need to talk about language that is like often dismissed in terms of like poetry writing. Um, like when I initially write in Indonesian, I use uh, in English I use the word like poop, and even in the first poem in my book I use the word sperm, and many people say to me, why do I use those words in my poetry? And because they kind of see me as like this elegant poet, and not. And then I think that's one of the important things in writing humorous poetry, how you question the gatekeeping of a language that is used in poetry scene, and how you can use your humor to at least resist that. I There is an Asian American poet Chen Chen, which I so love, and in one of his poems he asks, uh, "Do you think like something like Do you think your mother hates you when you fart?" I, it's a line that always gives me the laugh whenever I read the poem. But then I also notice it's not the kind of language that people expect in American poetry or Asian American poetry. So uh, what I feel like as a it's humor in a how to say like in a more general sense, it's funny, but in the deeper sense, it's actually subversive in in the ways that this poet want to try to change the language around poetry landscape. And so there is this language and expression, and then there is juxtaposition of images. Um, I think when in my exercise, I try to like list three words that people hate. Like I first of all I list three words that people hate, and then I list my pop culture like reference, and then I just try to make a poem based on that as a like daily exercise to sharpen my senses. And I also want to talk a bit about the idea of strangeness as humor. Like I said, like sometimes it's not you don't how to say you don't you don't make the humor intentionally, but then people thought it is as funny because like I said, like I feel like any of us, all of us, each of us is strange in different way. So if we how to say like if we can dig deeper into our life, we can find funny moments and then just how to say try to write a poem and share to our closest friends. We can see how just being like another person is is already funny. So I feel like humor is something. It's not. It's in Indonesia we call it selemparan batu. It's like it's so close that you just have to like one throw away. So I feel like it's it's a thing about humor because like for example when I try when I so I always think that humor relied a lot on timing and then how I always think I need to pronounce my words very clearly, so I tend to like uh, practice a lot before a reading. And then I one day I realized uh, how I pronounce the whole is not what many English speaking people pronounce it. I always pronounce like the vowel, and then it reminds me of the word the vowel. So when I notice that difference, I just put it in my phone, and I feel like those linguistic difference matters. And then I feel like even using an accounting language, it made the poem funny for some people. So if you how to say like stay in your life and then just try to dig deeper from your own context and try to like lay it down one by one. Uh, it's make your sensibilities regarding humor sharpen day by day. And then I also want to talk about social criticism because it's about reclaiming joy. Uh, I think it is common for us to be like angry about a poem because it's ignorant or it's like insensible in its humor. I feel like and then when we kind of like out the poet about it, and he would say like it's a satire, it's satirical, and I feel like um, if I always try to punch up rather than punch down. So if I want to make satire, I try to like offend people who is like in power. If for example, I use a lot of Christian imageries, not just because I was raised in a Christian family, but also because um, I want more people who has the similar background with me to like feel a little bit offended because like I think they don't they many Christians in Indonesia talk to me, why do you make Jesus your boyfriend? I was like, uh, yeah, that's how humor and how I saw Jesus in a way. So yeah, and I feel like by doing this, you kind of make these religious images the con the consecrated. So because you put it in a different light. So these images are no longer that serious, are no longer that sacred, are no longer that uncriticable. So by putting it to humor and then juxtapose it with a very, how to say, in a non serious way, you make them more human, and so it's more ready to make like a discussion, to communicate, to make changes. So that's I feel about using religious imageries, because uh, they are reconditioned into something else, and that that recondition allows a change. So there is this Indonesian writer that I really like, Intan Paramadita, and Intan uh, twists a lot of Islamic imageries that are heavily used in Indonesia in a feminist way. So I feel like what Intan do, basically what a comedian do, what a humorous poetry does, and then Intan kind of like that feminist twist is she said that uh, she's actually do that to like feminist horror, kind of like using using feminist lens to reframe how women are demonized in Indonesian landscape. So I feel like by following that framework of thinking, I can make my own humor responding to Christianity and the Bataknis tradition that I was came from. Um, Sometimes I feel like humor is like a window out open because it's not, you cannot go just straight into the, like a door. It's not straight into a door, like into a room. It's kind of like another way to say something, but then the most important thing is like it's half open, so uh, the readers should, to say, make more effort in understanding the humor, like because I feel like a good humor in poetry make you ask questions. Um, okay. I want to read a poem about, wait, sorry. So this is a poem that is translated from my first book of poems, translated by Tiffany Sao. I wrote this as a response to the communitarianism in Indonesia. In Indonesia, for example, um, we care a lot about what our neighbors say about us. So I wrote this in Indonesian to respond to that communitarianism, and this one is translated by Tiffany Sao. It's called a flyer. It's kind of like a found flyer. A flyer. This software will assemble a series of steps that will guarantee you'll be happy for the rest of your life. It was created in response to skewed notions of happiness, which have caused acute sorrow of pandemic proportions. To begin, please enter your personal data, including your real taxable income and passwords, all of your passwords. The program will compile news stories laws, cultural norms, and noteworthy social media posts relevant to your current location. Using the information amassed, it will generate a SWOT matrix to keep as a basis for further assessment, at which point, under the software guidance, you will ascertain what you must do to exploit your strengths, combat weaknesses, seize opportunities, and anticipate threats, thus providing you with financial, familial, legal, social, and spiritual fulfillment and security. Of course, if your tastes and preferences are somewhat unique, let's say you're a lesbian who has a love for cats and classic poetry like Inferno or Paradise Lost, more time will be required to complete the mapping process, solvable by upgrading your computer's RAM to 16 gigabytes. Also, the program may need to ask further questions. Is it a must for you to be with someone who loves reading too? And how much are you prepared to compromise when it comes to your sexuality? Would you be willing to make out with a man in the dark? If you say it enough, are you brave enough to spark life afresh in a place better able to accommodate you? Antarctica, for instance. This software also takes other users' priorities into account. For example, if 200 would-be college applicants are assessed, getting a, de- getting a certain degree at the most prestigious university in counteracts, and there are only 150 spaces, then the program will be forced to advise the 50 users with the lowest academic scores to settle. Failure is a punch in the guts, and they have to face facts. You would derive maximum benefit if your nearest and dearest sign up, accounting for environmental factors, will produce more accurate results. You see, we believe that an individual's path to happiness is coextensive with the paths of others and is sometimes even at cross purposes, like a troll net. However, if you come across this fire only after everyone else is dead, even better, you can use the program straight away. This poem is sorry, it's really hot here, like insanely hot. The poem that I just read is a response to how in Indonesia our happiness also related with how people see us. So sometimes if you're like differing from what people think as good, what people think of as kind, as good, it's harder for you to be happy. So I feel like by exposing it in that humorous way, I can start a discussion because I of course I can write something that is like um how to say something that's like more direct, but then by writing it humorously, I also make what I write bearable. Like I can also bear the idea of not being happy because at least in this poem I'm loving, and this um this loving over the poem uh by saying it funnily, it, I think what helps me to keep going in my writing. So because I feel like um how to say, I think many queer, many disabled people, we see many dark things every single day, and I feel like people will how to say like feel entitled even to comment on how we perceive and vision our liberation. So I feel like taking it humorously also helped me to keep going in my day-to-day life, not just as a poet but also as a human being. So We have to talk a bit about language and expression, and then juxtaposition of images, and then the consecration. I used to I like to say it as the divine nation. So like it's no longer divine, but then more human. The images. Um. Uh. it's- And I feel like many things about reclaiming joy in writing poetry also relate about community, because the funny fact about writing, you can never choose your readers. You also can never choose your reviewers, for example. So pretty much it's kind of like throwing a stone to the dark and waiting what comes back at you. So I feel like in reclaiming joy in poetry, I also like to see poets uh, as as human being, and so um, I, I I I I try to find people who has similar context with me. So I think it's it's also part of it, like outside how to say like outside of being a poet. So let's go back to the humor itself. I like to repeat a bit about uh, humor as a that comes from a different kind of lenses. So because I write in Indonesian, uh, there are many things I find funny when I go to Australia. Like I never thought it in a humorous way when I live in Indonesia. So I feel like by doing that, by doing travel, it also helps to you to see the humor in life. This is like more practical suggestion. Wait. I want to read a poem again because this one is people said it's funny, and I want to read it. And I can share a bit why I write about it. Call me by your name, which is responsible and not meteoric. We both know it's easier between two beautiful people. We both know it's easier when it's a nice mountain mansion in Italy with a shallow pool and a live-in adult nanny. And we both know it's easier since it's summer with, with ripening peaches and nobody is appearing without knocking. He looks like he never has to work a day in his life, your friend said over Vietnamese coffee while you are feeling despair, feeling ugly. Must be the weather's flu. But how do you hate a movie this good? Since it's as if the executive himself has come through the party crowds to hand you the rolled up movie poster. The whole thing, Han, is tailor-made just for you. Even the father is very gentle and educated, so you're sure he won't hit anyone. Admit it, it's always two hot dudes, and neither of them looks like you. See how the camera cleverly pans away, since everyone would agree a depiction of a late summer night in Italy is better. The two guys making love to each other. He's such a reticent guy, your friend spoke in defense of the director. He's even currently meditating in the west wing of the castle, considering a sequel. Maybe they will have something fat next year, another friend pursued. If you put your money on this one. His abs taste like jelly. Another friend, the pretty one, texted. If you want to date someone beautiful, be beautiful first. The pretty friend texted again. But beauty in fashion is like rotten bread. It poisons your brain and gives you intellectual diarrhea. It drives you to think of that. Okay, I will end reading the poem there, but I have so many people say to me that the first line, we both know it's easier between two beautiful people. Very funny. I was like, and they asked if it's intentional. I was like, it's just like pointing the fact, like what we think about Call Me by Your Name. It's so easy because like for so many reasons, and one of the initial reason is like both of them are beautiful. So I feel like uh, humor also can, how to say, like it works, can be very simple, and then the language you don't have to use the typical old man language. Like you don't have to be like complicated and like not in, I would say, like you don't have to use big words to say about big things. You can use like very common and words because you want to like make poetry in general less gatekept. So that's why what I think about humor. Like in one sense, it's funny. In second sense, it's like resisting the structure again, structure in society, and it's also resisting the structure in our poetry landscape. And that's how I like to see my poetry writing. I think so. Uh, I think that's all from me, and you can ask some questions via Twitter, and I will answer them. Thank you, Melody.
Thanks, Norman. Thanks so much. That was really great.
Thank you. I'm
Um,
nervous.
Sorry?
It's very. I'm nervous. It's very hot here.
Oh, you're doing great. You don't seem nervous at all. I'm sorry, it's so hot. So I thought I'd just start maybe with asking you some questions about.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about the title and the story of Sergius and Bacchus? Because it was something that I hadn't come across
Oh.
before, and I found it really interesting and beautiful.
Actually, my mom is like only a few meters, and I try to be very clear because it's about my boyfriend. So when
right.
I
Can you
no,
tell us
it's okay.
okay?
When I first met my boyfriend, my first boyfriend,
Hmm.
we initially met in a basement in a mall. It's like
Yeah.
abandoned mall.
Mhm.
So we met there, and then we kiss in his car.
Yeah.
So out of the blue, in our making out session, I said to him, "We are like early Christians. Do you know like they have to go underground to pray and we go underground to kiss?" So that's the initial story, the idea of like two Indonesian man
Mhm.
as Christian saints.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I discover Sergius and Bacchus um, from like books about history of the church by John Boswell, and then uh, I, I in Indonesia sometimes being queer, being gay is like often associated with demonization, like demon possession or even like apocalypse. So I feel like if I use this like holy faces, I can resist those associations. So in my first book of short stories, use the idea of waiting because I feel like waiting is a core component of Christian faith. But we wait because we not because we are not sure it exists. We wait because it exists. So it's the same with the word mencari, the word seek. I seek not because like this is like the azan in my place because we live near mosque, near masjid. I hope it's fine. Yeah, but in I used to I use the word six not because I want to signal it's not there, but because I signal it's there and I want to reclaim it.
Mhm. For people who don't know, what is the story of Sergius and Bacchus?
Oh, the story of Sergius and Bacchus. Oh, Sergius and Bacchus are two like Arabian Christians who live during the Galerius era, and they went underground to pray. But they also have, well, according to many historians, they have like how to say in English, like romantic dimension in their relationship. So it's kind of like bromance. But then they are discovered as Christians and they were executed. So, but they didn't they were adopted by the queer communities, and now it's kind of like similar to Saint Sebastian, and yeah, like queerly adopted by queer communities.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful story, and these stories and this sort of like queering of biblical stories is showing up a lot in your work.
Yeah,
Um, they're also often very funny poems as well, and I'm wondering how queering these biblical stories as well has also changed your own relationship with Christianity. Get that through your poetry.
because well, we don't have a lot of books when I grow up, so I mostly read Bibles, and I read Bibles as like thriller
Yeah.
rather than sacred text. So I used to think like, oh my god, this is so thrilling. This is like, and I mean, well, there are so many, how to say, questionable things in the Bible, but then as a kid, I saw it like watching Star Wars. It's like Star Wars but with magic. So uh, when I can never unload those kinds of stories and images from my head. So and I feel like I want to reframe at least the Christianity that lives with me in a queer way, because I feel like Christian is queer because I feel like the idea of a three-person God is queer. I feel
Yeah.
like Trinity is very queer for me, but I was like, because like initially it's it's how to say, it's female, it's male, it's none of them, it's both of them. So that idea of that I think is queer, and I feel like it's kind of like lost in translation, lost in time. So I feel like as a queer who lives in a Christian household, I want to reclaim it, because
Mhm.
if I don't reclaim it, there will be old men keep preaching about like queerness in a way in
Yeah.
Christianity in church. So yeah,
Reclaim the joy.
yeah,
I
reclaim the
love
joy.
that as well for this session. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, because I feel like many people talks about poet as if like we are different, but it's like, most of the time I am a human, just a human being, and only maybe 24 hours minus 5 minutes to be joyful, not just the 5 minutes. So yeah, that's yeah.
I have a really beautiful quote here from you from your pen essay, which I'd encourage everyone to read. It's a really beautiful piece in relation to what you were just saying. And you say it's called Against the Ignorant Sun. You say
Uh,
an avid reader living in poverty is a rereader. An avid reader living in poverty who is also a Christian is a Bible rereader.
yeah, I think I was. I don't know if any of you read about Jonah, the one who was eaten by a whale.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my favorite stories in the Bible, partly because I'm a Pisces, so I like fish.
Me too,
So
actually.
yeah, so how to say? I feel like I don't know why. I feel like the Jonah story is very queer. Like in terms like there is a man who doesn't want to go to the society, and kind of like, okay, well, just eat me. I don't want to talk to people. I find that story, okay, I can relate to this.
Yeah, yeah.
Someone chose to be eaten by a whale rather than talk to people. It's like, that's so me. Even though like I ended up being a person that is like very social, but when I was a kid, I don't have a lot of friends because many, like if you read my poems, there are also racism in the way I grew up. So when I read the Jonah story, I feel like, oh my God, I can relate to this.
Hmm.
Like many people relate to Spider-Man or X-Men, I relate to Jonah.
That's great. I thought we might just have a little bit of a conversation about translation as well. And the first thing I was thinking about in relation to this conversation and humour is how you find the act of translation affects humour. Like,
Yeah. Like
if
how
you're
to
writing
translate
a decision
humor.
and it's being translated into English,
Yeah, it's
you know,
that's
maybe
that's why
losing its humour, or maybe it goes the other way. Maybe things that weren't meant to
that's
come
the
back.
funny thing. Like I said in my presentation, I find humor writing humors in a humorous way in Indonesian is different in writing in humorous way in English,
Mhm.
because when I write in Indonesian, um, the language is with me gitu. The language is me. While I write in English, the language is someone that I talk to. So that's different kind of like. So I see like maybe English is kind of like a mirror that I try to and I try to see what kind of reflection in that mirror, while Indonesian is me. So that's the thing. That's one thing. And then when we talk about translating it, it's I'm so grateful that Tiffany and I we collaborate a lot. And I mean she really believe in my, how to say in English, my participation in this, because I heard like so many translator like to do it alone, but Tiffany like the space is very equal between us. We are like two sisters. I said we me and Tiffany, I said in one of my panels, me and Tiffany like linguistic wife and wife. So I feel like that's what makes translating humor easier, because like if it's not for that, I think it's gonna be so different, because I mean in Indonesian aggression can be very subtle. So when
Mhm.
you actually kind of like making an irony to kind of like criticize someone, sometimes it's not catch if you are not like, if you don't live in Indonesian language every day.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that collaborative relationship would be very important. Um,
It's really hard to you should read Tiffany's essay. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I did read it, and everyone else should read it as well. It's great. But yeah, that needing to understand someone else's sense of humor as well in order to be able to translate it. Um,
And Tiffany write comical novels, so it helps, I guess.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, Maybe just as a closing question, so both you and Tiffany are both very passionate and vocal about unveiling colonial tendencies in translation practices around Indonesian writers. So maybe could you speak to that, and maybe you might be able to tell us some of your favourite Indonesian poets.
Oh, uh,
About.
so you asked my favorite Indonesian poets.
Yeah, and just maybe to talk to a little bit about.
Uh, there is an Indonesian poet named Joko Pinurbo. He's Japanese and grew up in a working class family.
Mhm.
And his poems kind of like very humorous, but very honest in terms of like speaking about poverty, because like it comes from his own experience and his own life, that I feel like all of the humor can be funny and sad. So I kind of like, then because it's Indonesian context, it's really funny for me.
Mhm.
I don't think it's translatable too, because I was like, this kind of humor is like it you cannot get this if you don't speak Indonesian. And there is another poet called named Dorothea Rosa Herliani. She write many angry feminist poems, which I so love. She used many biblical imageries and kind of like turn things back, like how to say, it's it's feminist, it's angry, it's dark, It's also not dark. So yeah, yeah. She is translated and published by Arc Poetry Press in the UK. The book called Kill the Radio, and there is Santa Rosa. So it is quite similar. So Dorothea Rosa Herliani used the name of Santa Rosa, the Saint Rosa, to and make it a book. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has read Incarnadine by Mary Bees. Mary did the same thing. So they use Virgin Mary's name because the name is similar, and then kind of like juxtapose it. And even though both of them, I mean, Incarnadine and Santa Rosa is how to say, not laugh out funny. I think the construction of everything is very humorous, and then even reading those books, I can get, how to say, like, I have an imagination of what can be done with this in humorous way. So I feel like even reading feminist gothic like Intan Paramadita that I mentioned in my presentation, it helps me as a funny person.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much for those recommendations. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Norman. It's really lovely to have you. And thanks everyone for tuning in. So we'll be back next week at the same time, the date of which is next Thursday. What's that? The 17th, with Kelly Saunders. So tune in then. Thank you everyone, and thanks so much, Norman.
Bye.
See you.